Robert Wagner, Natalie Wood, and Christopher Walken were all together on the night of Wood's death. But what most people don't know is that there was a fourth person present. Years later, this witness came forward with shocking new evidence, and it was utterly bone-chilling. Some celebrities' careers are easily eclipsed by the outrageous scandals surrounding their names. In Robert Wagner's case, it comes down to one single scandal: Natalie Wood's drowning. We may remember Wagner as the handsome star of TV's Hart to Hart, but mostly we remember him as the suspicious guy who sat on board drinking while his wife quietly drowned. Here's the facts about Robert Wagner, the star who may have gotten away with murder. It's hard to imagine two more unexciting jobs than the ones Wagner's parents had. Phone operator and traveling salesman sounds more like a sitcom job than the type of people who would bring a handsome Hollywood star into the world. But that's what they were doing in 1930 in Detroit, Michigan, where they had baby Robert. But humble beginnings often make for great endings. While still a teenager, Robert Wagner did a screen test for Academy Award-winning director and producer Fred Zinnemann. The screen test won absolutely no praise and got Wagner nowhere, but it did give him the acting bug, and he went out on his own to find himself an agent. With that, he soon found success and a contract with 20th Century Fox Studios, but that wasn't all he found. Wagner must have thought he'd truly arrived as people noticed him strutting around the offices at 20th Century Fox. His alluring presence attracted the attention of a 10-year-old Natalie Wood, who was already a seasoned performer. When Wood saw the teenage Wagner, she turned to her mom and said, "I'm gonna marry him one day." She was wrong. She would actually end up marrying him twice. Wagner landed a role in Titanic in 1953. His co-star was Barbara Stanwyck, and behind the scenes, the pair shared a dark secret. Wagner claimed he had a 4-year relationship with the much older megastar. That's 23 years older to be exact. The studio couldn't use this romance to sell Wagner as a leading man, so they paired him with someone much younger instead. A few years later, the studio decided that Wagner and Wood would make a cute couple. Wood was 8 years younger than Wagner, but surprisingly, she had more experience under her belt as an actor. Wood was a teenager herself at this point, but there was something brewing that no one expected that came from this publicity date. Robert Wagner had a plan to propose to Natalie Wood by floating an engagement ring in a glass of champagne. While this wasn't exactly an original idea, it was, in hindsight, incredibly ominous. This was the beginning of a relationship that would be focused on water, boats, and anything nautical, but we'll soon see why this couple should have stayed as far away from water as humanly possible. Wagner had a love of sailing, which led him to plan a yacht trip in the Florida Keys for his honeymoon. However, there was something strange about this plan. It was a little one-sided. In fact, Wood reported on many occasions that she had an intense fear of dark or deep water. When two stars like Wagner and Wood get together, the media goes wild. It got so bad that on a road trip across the country, radio stations broadcast sightings of the Hollywood couple driving down the highway. And what happened next? Crowds lined the streets of every small town they passed through. The public went crazy for Wagner and Wood. But critics, not so much. It was actually the critics who ate them alive. The movie was All the Fine Young Cannibals. As much as they were media sensations, their first film together, about a young couple whose family forces them to marry other people, wasn't well received. The silver lining? The film inspired the name of the 1980s music group Fine Young Cannibals. In spite of the failure of All the Fine Young Cannibals, the lives of Wagner and Wood must have looked pretty fairy tale from the outside, a gorgeous couple always posing aboard yachts. However, the reality was much darker. Their marriage wasn't great, and they were on the verge of separating. Wood's star was on the rise a lot faster and more directly upward compared to Wagner's. This was hard on Wagner's ego, but there was something even more troubling that was pulling this couple apart. In 1961, Wood began working on Splendor in the Grass, a coming-of-age period film. Her co-star was the notoriously monogamy-challenged Warren Beatty. Rumor has it that Wood and Beatty found their own splendor, not in the grass, but in a bed. This certainly would explain the Wagner-Wood breakup, but there's another more scandalous rumor that could explain it. Rumors that Wood cheated with Beatty and caused a separation are more convenient than the other stories out there. Wood's sister Lana claims that one day, Wood arrived unannounced to their Beverly Hills mansion and found a scandalous surprise. Wagner was in their bed, but not with another woman, with a man. Back then, it would have been a career-ending story for Wagner. Either way, Wood just ditched the relationship and kept her mouth shut. And what did Wagner do? Well, he didn't waste any time getting married after splitting up with Natalie Wood. Perhaps it was to dispel any racy rumors. In 1963, he tied the knot with Marion Marshall Donen, who was famous for her roles in the madcap films of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. A year later, the pair had a daughter, Katie Wagner. Marriage to Donen seemed to agree with Wagner, but it didn't agree with his career. It was tanking, and he needed a lifeline. Robert Wagner complained that because most film roles were anti-hero characters, there weren't roles for nice guys like him. The between-the-lines reading was that he thought he was too handsome for the new, edgier films being made in Hollywood. But what about television? Soon, Wagner got the role of a handsome ex-con in It Takes a Thief. The show was an immediate hit, and Wagner's career took off. However, not all was well with Wagner. His marriage had simply hit its expiration date, and the pair divorced in 1971. Next, Wagner briefly dated Frank Sinatra's daughter, Tina, going as far to propose to her. He reportedly loved hanging around Frank's Palm Springs compound, but something Natalie Wood did caused Wagner to drop Sinatra immediately. Wagner was, of course, aware that his ex, Natalie Wood, had also remarried, but the news of her divorce sent Wagner into a tizzy. He quickly invited Wood to his Palm Springs home. It was unclear what Wagner was up to. Friendship? Friends with benefits? Who knows? But what actually happened in Palm Springs surprised everyone. Some major rekindling must have happened because Wagner and Wood were definitely on again. The media-hungry couple chose the 1972 Oscar ceremony to come out publicly as a reunited couple. Wood's sister says it felt like the whole world felt sentimental about the reconciliation. In June 1972, Wagner and Wood set sail for an old-fashioned Atlantic crossing. Wagner was on his way to promote a new TV movie he made with screen legend Bette Davis. The two stars were in love again and getting back on the ocean. It should have been a happy time, but there were stormy skies ahead. The trip across the Atlantic was supposed to be a time for Wagner and Wood to further rekindle their romance. Unfortunately, it only rekindled Wood's fear of water. The first morning into the crossing, huge waves, some up to 70 feet, began to slam against the boat, and they didn't let go for days. Maybe Wagner and Wood should have taken this as a sign to not get back together. Once they arrived safely on land in the UK, they decided it was time to retie the knot. Maybe it was the terror of their experience that pushed them forward. It seems, however, that they didn't really learn a lesson from their harrowing experience at sea. Check out the venue for their second wedding. Wagner and Wood were either water crazy or just plain crazy. Even after their ordeal, they borrowed a yacht called the Ramblin' Rose for their second wedding. Guests came aboard for the ceremony and they sailed off near Malibu. Afterward, the couple took off on their second honeymoon, with a destination of California's Catalina Island. They were blissfully unaware then, but years later, it would become the site of one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries. It's common knowledge, amongst sailors anyways, that changing the name of a boat is bad luck. Wagner and Wood surely knew this, but threw caution to the wind and did it anyways. In 1975, they purchased a boat called Challenger, but weren't happy with the name. Wood loved a poem by Wordsworth that contained the word splendor, so they agreed that that would be the new name of their yacht. But perhaps Wood had a more sinister motive. The name of their boat, Splendor, wasn't just a reference to a poem. It was much more than that. As you'll remember, it was on the set of Splendor in the Grass where Wood had allegedly had an affair with co-star Warren Beatty. Every time Wagner got on the boat, he'd have a visual reminder of the affair with Beatty. But while that was safely in the past, Wood's jealousy, on the other hand, was firmly in the present. At this point in their lives, the tables had turned. Wood's career was struggling while Wagner's was soaring. His TV show, Hart to Hart, was a huge hit, mostly because of the chemistry between Wagner and his stunning co-star, Stephanie Powers. Audiences had trouble believing that they weren't a couple in real life, and, well, Wood had the same problem. One day, Wood packed up two of their kids and headed to the studio to surprise Wagner on the set of the show. As luck would have it, Wagner was in the middle of filming a love scene with Powers. Wood and the girls walked right in and saw Wagner in a rather compromising position with his co-star. It wasn't. However, Wood's reaction was over-the-top emotional. When Wagner's daughters saw him romancing Powers on the set of Heart to Heart, they burst into tears. It must have been some pretty good acting, or was it? Maybe even the children could see what was really going on. There was something real about this passion. Wood explained to the kids about his job, but it could be that she was just shocked as well. As we'll see, Wood was quietly planning her revenge. Woods managed to get a role in Brainstorm alongside a cast of Academy Award winners and nominees. The sci-fi film didn't impress critics, but co-star Christopher Walken impressed Woods, who had a serious infatuation with the Oscar-winning actor. So what did she decide to do? Rub it in her husband's face. It was Thanksgiving 1981, and Wagner and Wood opted for a little relaxation without the kids. Wood, probably still jealous of Wagner and his co-star, invited Christopher Walken as a third wheel. It'd be safe to say that TV star Wagner would have been more than a bit intimidated by Walken, who just scored Oscar gold with The Deer Hunter. And all of this was taking place on board Splendor, the boat named after Wood's affair with Warren Beatty. Captain Dennis Davern anchored Splendor near the lovely town of Avalon, California, which is on Santa Catalina Island. The three actors went into town to have dinner. Staff at the restaurant noticed that the group was drinking pretty heavily. But there was something else the staff reported that raised a red flag. While they were at the restaurant, Wagner couldn't help but notice something disturbing. Wood and Walken had become quite chummy during the filming of Brainstorm, and the chumminess was carrying on right into the restaurant. Co-star friendships are fairly common, but it's possible that Wagner saw their intimacy as romantic, and a potential threat to his marriage. Once back aboard Splendor, the only thing that we knew for sure is that the three actors continued to drink. The captain of the ship joined them. There are accounts from Wagner, Walken, and Davern that at times agree with each other, and other times go in opposite directions. There's one thing we do know for sure. Wood would never see the light of day again. The next morning, Wood's body was found 1 mile from Splendor, floating near the boat's dinghy. A blood sample revealed that she'd been drinking heavily, and there were superficial bruises on her body. At first glance, it appeared to be a straightforward accidental drowning that occurred when Wood was attempting to get on the dinghy from the main boat. But it turns out there was nothing straightforward about this case. Authorities interviewed Wagner twice. Both times were shortly after the drowning. Wagner's story was simple. He said that Wood went to bed early, and when he went to check on her, he couldn't find her in her room. He then noticed that the dinghy was also missing. But it was the second interview that Wagner remembered a fact that pointed to something more sinister. Detectives cut Wagner's first interview short due to his emotional state. In his second interview, a few days later, he told pretty much the same story, with one key difference. He remembered that in the time between Wood going down to her room and Wagner checking on her, something else had occurred. Walken had gone out to the deck for some air. Was Wagner trying to point the finger away from himself and directly at Walken? While it seemed to be a clear drowning by accidental causes, a few odd facts arose that made people wonder if there wasn't something else happening. One thing was Wood's fear of dark water and drowning in general. Why would she be getting on a dinghy in the middle of the night if she was afraid of deep water? But there was something even more disturbing about this investigation. The coroner of the case, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, performed an autopsy on Wood's body. He then seemed to go out of his way to downplay anything that would lead people to believe that Wagner, or anyone else, was involved in the drowning. He downplayed the drinking and he downplayed the bruises. But why? Why was the coroner against implicating Wagner? Noguchi had gotten into trouble on a recent job concerning actor William Holden's accidental passing. It seems that he had divulged too much information, especially about Holden's level of inebriation. Noguchi wasn't going to make that mistake again, not with the even more famous Wagner and Wood. However, there was an even more bizarre connection between these two cases. William Holden wasn't a complete stranger to Wagner. In fact, he was the romantic partner of Stephanie Powers, the same woman Wood had been so jealous of before. Doesn't it seem strange that both stars of the hit show Hart to Hart, the ones who had such amazing on-screen chemistry, were both suddenly single due to a tragic accident? Accidents that happened to have taken place only a couple of weeks apart. What was Wagner doing during all of this? Well, he was working on damage control. In the months following the drowning incident, Robert Wagner seemed intent on keeping the boat's captain under close watch. Davern stayed at Wagner's home and said he found it hard to leave. For one thing, the place was highly alarmed. Then, there was another reason. Wagner's bodyguard kept stopping him at the door. Why was Wagner afraid to let Davern talk, and how far would he go to keep him silent? Davern, who'd never shown any interest in acting, suddenly received offers for roles in commercials and even a small part in Wagner's Heart to Heart. All were courtesy of his friend, Robert Wagner. It's hard to tell if Wagner was just trying to help his captain and friend, or if he was trying to keep him from telling the truth about what happened that night off Catalina Island. But then, Wagner went even further. As if the roles in commercials and TV weren't enough, Wagner started offering Davern lump sums of money for no obvious reason. Davern's friends were telling him that Wagner was paying him hush money, and if Davern accepted the money, he'd have to keep his mouth shut. But what was it that he knew about Wagner that he wasn't telling? Davern has, on many occasions over the years, teased the media about having certain knowledge about Wood's mysterious death, and then quickly backtracking and saying he wouldn't share anything. Could it be that he's not giving up the info because Wagner's already finding new ways to make him stop? So if Davern isn't sharing, what's Wagner's version of the events that night? In Wagner's 1986 biography, the actor speculated on what happened that fateful night. He claimed that Wood fell overboard because she was trying to tighten the rope on the dinghy. Why was she tightening the rope? He says that the noise of the dinghy knocking against the boat was keeping her awake. And what about the argument, Wood's bruises and Walken's flirting? How can you explain those? Wagner didn't have to, because the captain finally decided to speak. It took years for Captain Davern to finally share his versions of the event that night, and all the details were explosive. It goes like this. Once the three actors returned from dinner, the drinking continued. Somehow, in all the merriment, it came out how Wagner felt about Wood and Walken flirting. Wagner smashed a bottle across the table and yelled at Walken, accusing him of trying to take his wife. Then Walken bolted for his room, and Wood stormed off to hers. But it wasn't over yet. Davern claimed that he continued drinking with Wagner once Wood and Walken had gone to their separate rooms. Then, Wagner decided to go check up on Wood. Davern reports that he heard a fight like he'd never heard before. They were screaming and throwing things around. Davern then heard someone messing with the dinghy lines, like they were trying to untie it. Then suddenly, Wagner came back, but he didn't look too good. It seems that Captain Davern was too intoxicated to worry about the sounds of someone messing with the dinghy he'd heard, because he forgot all about it. When Wagner returned from checking on Wood, however, Davern said he was sweating. He said it looked like he'd been in a fight. The two men drank some more, and then Wagner again went to check on Wood. It was then that Wagner reported that he couldn't find his wife anywhere on the boat, so Davern offered to check for her as well. He went straight to Walken's room, in case she'd ended up there. She hadn't. In fact, she wasn't on the boat at all. That's when Davern noticed that the dinghy was missing as well. Wagner and the captain raised the alarm at 1:30 a.m. Since Wagner and Davern couldn't locate Wood on board the boat, Davern had two great suggestions. One was to use the boat's floodlights to search the water, and the other was to start up the motor and cruise around to find Wood. All reasonable solutions that could have saved Wood's life. And what did Wagner say? Well, it was something he'd lived to regret. Robert Wagner's reaction to Davern's suggestion was utterly cold-blooded. He shut the captain down. He said he didn't want to alert the other boaters around them. As far as the two men knew, Wood was drowning as they spoke. Wagner said that instead of searching for Wood, they should radio for help. That doesn't sound like the actions of a distraught husband whose wife is missing. Because of Davern's new testimony, more than 700 people thought that something was fishy about Wood's drowning. In 2011, these 700 people, including Davern himself, signed a petition showing their dissatisfaction with the outcome of the investigation. Something was suspicious about this accident, and most people suspected that Wagner was at the bottom of it. But what could a petition do? Apparently, a heck of a lot. After the petition and the captain's testimony, the coroner finally changed the designation of the accident. The words the coroner used to describe the accident now said that Wood's passing was due to drowning and other undetermined factors. It was a big change from the previous accidental drowning. But what about Wagner's role in all of it? After Wood drowned, authorities didn't immediately consider Wagner a suspect at all. But with the new evidence given by Davern, investigators changed Wagner's status to person of interest. This change happened in 2018, decades after the original drowning. It's a case that threatens to overshadow Wagner's career and celebrity, and will continue to do so until the truth finally surfaces. Less than 3 months after Wood's body was found floating in the sea, Wagner, on Valentine's Day, 1982, started dating again. He had known Bond girl Jill St. John since the 1950s, where they'd been contract players at 20th Century Fox. But there's a surprising side to their relationship. What seemed like a surefire case of rebound has turned into a long-term union, outlasting all the other relationships of Wagner and St. John combined. On that fateful Thanksgiving in 1981, a couple on a boat anchored near the Splendor and heard a woman's voice cry out, "Help me, someone please help me." The couple then heard the voice of a man say, "Okay, honey, we'll get you." The couple didn't do anything about the voices. They thought it was just party people playing around. But it raises questions. Was this man Wagner? And if it was, why didn't he help his wife? If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.